Hi, I'm Denise Colson with Trauma Education and Consultation Services, and this is my God Heals Trauma channel. Today, we're joined by Karl and Julie Nichols of Relevant Church in Locust Grove, Georgia. They're a pastoral couple whose ministry has been transformed by integrating the 12STR system and the trauma healing framework outlined in Break Every Sneaking Chain. They've led their church into a new chapter, one that prioritizes healing, honesty, and wholeness. We're here to hear their story, how they got there, what they've learned, and what advice they have for others who are called to similar work. Welcome, Julie and Karl. Thank you all so much for spending some time with me today to share your story and to encourage other people on this journey of becoming more trauma informed in their church. So let's start at the beginning. I'd like for you both to tell us a little bit about your ministry, your background, and what really first opened your eyes to the need for trauma healing in the church.
So I'll start, but it kind of leans into a little bit of what Julie helped us discover. Probably 2017, I think we were sitting in a room, kind of talking about who we wanted to become as a church, and really our calling. The church had exploded in 2015 and 16 and 17, and we're trying to figure out how to care for. Honestly, we had just really struck a vein with a lot of people dealing with a lot of baggage. And through an exercise, a leadership exercise, I think we had 6 or 7 staff in the room at the time. We won't go through all the details, but we came to this conversation like we're facing a crisis of brokenness. And without, like I said, dealing with too much of, the 4 or 5 hours we were in the room, it really started with Julie just wrote that phrase down on a piece of paper in an exercise. And we just prayed over it. It kind of resonated with the whole room. It was really a Holy Spirit moment. And from that, I think she can speak to this, but I think that really bonded our entire team, especially us, I think as a husband and wife, because I'm at my core, I'm a suck the buttercup kind of person. And I think it really raised awareness through that exercise that we did that we really had to tackle this crisis of brokenness. It wasn't just a few, sinful things that people are doing. We are a broken culture.
Mhm. Yes, yes. And so when you really came across that brokenness, Julie, and you wrote that down, what happened next?
So we just really set out on a journey to figure out how we could implement groups, programs, ministries, whatever at our church that would help people who are coming in. And I don't know that I even knew the word trauma in the sense of how we know it now, what we're talking about here. Um, I don't think I had a good understanding of that, but just through reading and research and familiarity with counselors and things, what we realized is people can come to church all throughout the week and they can attend every Sunday, but sometimes they just need something else. They need to talk through what has happened to them, what's going on presently, what they're fearing, all of these things. And so we just realized that trauma word was so important in understanding how to get people to walk through that journey. And so we knew they needed more than the Sunday morning experience. And they may need a counselor, they may need other support systems. And so that's what we set out to develop from there.
When you
Right.
talk about when you talk about the beginning of the journey, that's really kind of where it started and the turning point for us, really, because we had Celebrate Recovery
Right.
and I was thriving, but we realized that that was a, percentage of our church that was really connecting there and finding wholeness and healing. But there was another 80% of our church who would maybe never attend Celebrate Recovery. So that was a
Right.
huge point for us. And we realized, what are we going to do now for, the vast majority of us who have not dealt with the things from our past?
Yeah. So you were kind of primed. And then how did you come across the 12STR, the Break Every Sneaking Chain book and workbook in that information?
Julie, you introduced us to that concept through, I think, probably conversations with Rachel, who was in the counseling pipeline at the time.
Yeah, I've known Rachel for several years. In fact, through the process of her, I knew Rachel before she started attending our church, and just had some conversations on the phone with her about some things she was dealing with in her own personal life. She had family members that attended our church and reached out to me to kind of walk her through a process, and so she and I developed a relationship through that, and then At the same time, she was pursuing her counseling degree and ended up being a part of Eagles Landing Christian Counseling. So really, it was just my relationship with Rachel where we were constantly talking about these things. And she would come to me and she'd hear something Karl would say in a message and she would tie that back to counseling or trauma or whatever. And so it was just our relationship and our conversations that led us to the book and all that you provide, Denise, as far as services and support for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I got to supervise Rachel.
Yes. Yes.
So when she brought that, so I don't remember the exact timeline, but 2017-ish was, I said, okay, we gotta talk about trauma and or just, big T trauma or little T trauma. But the reality is we all have stuff from our past that's affecting the way we think and the way our viewpoints. And so I preached two message series in our church that had just a high level of impact. One was called The Good Life. It was just a 4-week message about, sin and the fallen nature of humanity. But then it got to the end of that series and I was like, it still feels incomplete. So about, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks later, I circled back to the series called The Function of My Dysfunction. Without going into too much of the specifics of that, basically our brain is the largest function junction, most powerful function junction, function being a math term. It's how we process to compute outputs. And really in that study, I really got into, I've always loved psychology to some degree, but never, again, I default back to, just deal with it and get over it. And so as we got into that, I realized, man, not only if we're going to deal with the crisis of brokenness, we have to help people get whole. And so this term, wholeness, wellness for the lonely, overwhelmed, vulnerable, and empty, LOVE, that just became our mission. And then through that, COVID hit right after some of the, not, within the next 12 to 18 months. And we realized, man, the culture just doubled down on the brokenness. And from that those two series came to what we know today as The Good Life, which is a 9-week discipleship journey we take people through. And through our conversations with Rachel and you, and again, not knowing the whole timeline, that's where we really started using the 12 steps. The source assessment and trying to figure out what exactly,
The simple trauma source assessment.
Simple trauma source assessment. Yeah. And so that became week 6 of The Good Life. Rachel and I took the stage. We share our stories and it opens up doors and they take the 18 and under and the 18 and over assessment. And there's a couple of aha moments we can get into that everybody almost inevitably goes to, but that was it. And The Good Life has radically been a catalyst for digging deeper into many childhood issues that have gone on to establish adulthood, situations, people doubling down on their own trauma.
So you started out talking about mental health issues, along with the idea of brokenness and spiritual brokenness from the pulpit on Sunday mornings. And, 66% of pastors never mention mental health issues, but you decided to do that. And you saw the response you got. It was such a strong response that you took that and you built this whole 9-week course that you teach called The Good Life. And using that, you incorporate the simple trauma source assessment, the importance and value of talking about not only childhood trauma, but adult trauma also.
Yeah. Yes. And in that, I think we started out with Celebrate Recovery back in the day, hurts, habits, and hangups. And they were like, okay, that was a small part of our population. And as the church has grown, it's only gotten, and I think the crazy part about our church, first of all, I think it all starts with a place that the leadership is authentic, that we don't spiritualize everything. And I know this sounds difficult for pastors to say, but a lot of times we want to pray it away. We want to talk about the power of God. I believe in the power of God, but I also believe in the responsibility that we have. And so, God can break things in a moment, but we have to relearn some things. We have to unlearn some things and relearn some things. And I've been saying this for a decade or longer, half of learning is unlearning.
Yes.
You just taught his disciples, you've heard that it was said, but I tell you, you've heard that it was said, but I tell you, that's unlearning a way of thinking. And we all have that in some degree. And so that sparked to like, okay, we can't just send people to a class or pray for people and expect them to be whole. And The Good Life, yes, we've had close to 1,000 people go through The Good Life now. And vast majority of them has taken another step. But we realized The Good Life wasn't the end all. And it led to book studies like Emotionally Healthy Spirituality and then trauma counseling and group therapy and some, would land in Celebrate Recovery and some of our other groups. But it really was that it's like once you scratch it, and I think a lot of pastors avoid this topic because it's the hard work of getting people whole.
Yeah.
And just so that once we got into it, we realized, okay, that's what God's called us to, but we had to really kind of unify around that common language.
Yeah. And Julie, then you organized a training that we did, a 3-day intensive training that we did for your lay counselors, your greeters, your Celebrate Recovery folks, everybody else that was involved in ministry. Tell me what impact did that make for you guys?
Yeah, so out of the good life, anytime we do something new like this, where we know we're tackling some mental illness issues, we know that we have to be prepared as a team to handle whatever comes out of that. And it's like Carl said, you start scratching the wounds, you have to have some kind of care for those people. And so we realized that a lot of Carl's messages when he started speaking on these issues of like depression, anxiety, whatever, that's just the fruit that we're seeing, but there's a root cause of all of those kinds of things. And when he would start speaking on those things, people were seeking out help. And so we realized that we needed some frontline team to help with just trying to have language with people, to talk to them, to be able to have a conversation and maybe just point them to a next step. And so that's when we decided that maybe having some lay counselors. And so what we did is we just picked our high level ministry leaders, people that we felt like that were caring and nurturing, and also well respected, who had led in our church for a while. These were not people that we did not open it up to the general population of our church.
Right.
We hand selected based on recommendations from our staff. And we chose all ministry areas, CR, kids, our guest services team, because what we know is if I serve on guest services, I have a relationship with that coordinator. I may not have a relationship with, staff pastor A or whatever. Same thing for kids team. And so we picked those coordinators and leaders in those ministries because we wanted our volunteers, especially, to be able to feel comfortable going to someone that they trusted or already had some form of a relationship with. And so out of that, we've been able to equip uh, many of our ministry leaders to be able to handle these conversations when people come and they say, I'm struggling with something. It just provided them language and next steps. And it didn't just feel like, hey, just go to counseling and we never talk about this again. It's just a kind of a median there where it's kind of advice and guidance, but it's like, hey, here's what I would recommend. This is your choice. But so many times we've seen healthy conversations. I'll give you an example. I'm in I lead a marriage and family small group, and we have a group meet, and a lady reached out a few weeks ago and just put that she was having some really dark thoughts, bad thoughts, and not really the point where she had a plan or anything to do anything, but you could tell she was struggling. And I watched as many of the people who were trained as lay counselors, they were the ones to respond and actually gave her really sound advice. And I thought, and some sound like next steps. This is what you need to do. And it was just great because, anybody can say anything about anything and you don't know what their background is. And so I just saw those people step up and be the ones to care and love on her and get her through her next steps in that.
Denise, I know that you want to see this kind of play out in local churches and kind of the partnership conversation. I think I don't want to, when we first started the lay counseling, we had this like elaborate strategy of how this might work. And if you needed counseling, you needed to see someone, and really it's become more organic now in the sense of, obviously, our story and our full counseling approach to really get people whole. But now it's like inundated our ministries. And I would say if I were going back, I would I would have 5 or 10 people from every department, area, whatever, of ministry trained in this as specialists. And I would rather than trying to make it all, hey, you got 3 meetings with this person, or Like I would let it become a culture in our church. And I think that's really accidentally what has happened for
That's
us
what it
is we
sounds like. Yeah.
yep. And then people are like, where did you learn that? And then of course people coming out of the good light that then go to counseling also understand it quite a bit. And
Mhm.
so it's become a culture versus a system. And I think both are important, but I think the culture is really what drives people to the safe conversations.
Right. Right. Because you guys have normalized it that we're
Yeah.
all broken. We all need, right? But a lot of what's underlying this brokenness is this trauma that has to be talked about, as opposed to you didn't avoid, like people didn't avoid the woman who was having these dark thoughts. Instead
Mhm.
of avoiding her or staying away from her because they didn't know what to do, they were drawn to her and were
Yes.
able to listen to her, to understand that there's probably past trauma in her
Mhm.
life that needs to be dealt with, and give her actual steps to take to
Mhm.
move forward to address the issues.
Yeah.
Yes.
The church we grew up in, historically, counseling was there. It was an opportunity, but it was also like only if you're really screwed up do you
Right.
go. I also think sometimes that leads you to screw your life up more if you don't go. And I think we just normalize the fact that everybody needs somebody to talk to, and some people need a little more intentional conversations because of your life situation. And so yeah, it's one of the top three toughest maybe systems slash values, culture, whatever you want to call it, we've implemented because it is ongoing. It's not like you solve the problem by a certain date. It is every week. This week I'll have a conversation doing study for this Sunday's message about substances and abuse because it's one of the hot topics we talk about.
Wow, that's great.
You can't talk about that without talking about the mental health
You really
conversation.
can't.
But we spiritualize it. It's easy to spiritualize it. Theology, talk about theology, but but why do people actually turn to it? Why do people actually run to it? And
Yeah.
so again, we'll strike that vein. I mean, we strike it every 4 to 6 weeks from the platform, in addition to, all of our pathways. Julie called it a group, but it's really about 80 people in a pathway. That's why there's so much support. Us uh, just a whole philosophy and strategy we can talk to offline about how we've seen that infiltrate the ministries of our church.
And from my understanding, your church has grown and you are attracting more people because of this culture that you've created.
Yeah, I think it's crazy because people constantly say it feels like home, but yeah, their home was so jacked up, and it feels like I think it's like the home they never had. And yeah, I mean, we've grown about 1,300 people in 12 months, and
That's great.
uh,
Praise
maybe
God.
yeah, and it's like, what are we gonna do? I mean, and again, it's the snowball. Everybody's like lined up to get help, which is a good problem to have, I guess.
It is a good problem to have. So we started out, you guys were looking for a counseling center, and we partnered together and we kind of put a counseling center in the church. I trained your two counselors. I supervised them through their students as students, and then moved them on to postmaster's supervision. We've continued to work with them. We trained the lay counselors, a group of lay counselors. We've provided you the material. We've partnered over these past several years. And now you are launching relevant counseling in your own church, which is
Yes.
so exciting. So now you're going to be able to, the counselors are going to be able to be there on site and working with people and be feeling at home. And I think you're going to even be able to have a separate building. Am I correct?
Yes.
It's when we did the memorandum of understanding with you guys back 4 years ago. I don't even know the timeline now, Denise. But the thing that I would say that has worked so well is the trust factor. We weren't meddling in your business. You weren't meddling in ours. We trusted the process. We honored the process. You always knew up front, we know this is a long-term sustainable thing that we were moving towards. We just didn't know when.
Yeah.
I think that's been huge is that, and again, you say we started relevant counseling. We always called it relevant counseling, but really it was filtered through Eagles Landing. Some of them met here, some of them met there. And now we've got our 501c3 and launched now. And by the grace of God, it'll open fully in June. And, so that's exciting. But yeah, again, the conversations early on were so important about what the end goals, what your goals were. And that's been a great partnership.
Well, it has just really honestly been a blessing and a privilege. And, really that is our goal. I've worked a lot with church planters in the past. And in a way, I see part of our vision is being planting Christian counseling centers in churches with churches that are really focusing on healing those trauma lives because, we believe that as trauma is healed, people can more clearly hear the Holy Spirit calling to them, and they are able to make an informed choice about Jesus. And of course, that's our whole goal. Our whole goal is that we want to see God heal trauma, and we know God heals trauma. And in healing trauma, he draws people to himself. And then that draws more people, and more people draw more people as they see the healing that takes place in people's lives. So thank you so much for the opportunity of partnering with you guys. And I'm so happy for you. And I appreciate so much the trust that you put in me and in us to serve your congregation. And I know, of course, we'll still be working together.
Yeah.
But I'm very excited that you, even though we're going to miss the ladies from our office, we are very excited that you guys having the opportunity now to take this step. So any final things you would advise other churches who might want to, take the same pathway, maybe are looking like you were, for how do we help all these broken people? Any advice you would give them?
I, we were just talking about the space and, as having our own space now, but, I go back to when we didn't have our own space and we decided that we were going to have counselors, on site at our church to make it more convenient for people in our area. Cause we're separated by about 20 miles and we all know
Right.
traffic is terrible.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Worse than it was when we first started.
Yes. And so it's, 20 miles isn't that much, but in traffic, it can take an hour. And so I would just encourage other pastors and staff, like you can find a spot in your building to create a confidential counseling space where a client is going to feel comfortable. They're going to feel valued and honored. And so we were at a point where although our building is fairly large, all the rooms are designated spaces. And so we had to figure out what can we do to make a space for a counseling room. And so we had a prayer and care room. And then when we added a second counselor, we decided we were going to put that space in our volunteer room. So we purchased furniture for that as a church. And then there were times where we would have 3 counselors or whatever, multiple appointments. And so Karl would give up his office on several days. And so for us, it was just that important to make the investment, whatever it took, we were going to do because we felt like it was that important for people to find wholeness and healing. And some of that is done through counseling. And so I would just encourage pastors and staffs to be creative, to think of their facility as being portable, even though it may have concrete and walls. You can adjust and you can make space for people to have counseling sessions.
Yeah. Funny story about that. And then I got a lot of thoughts on what to tell churches, but a few weeks back, one of our counselors was here and it was a Wednesday and she said, I've got a 4:30 and I get a text. First of all, I'm sitting in my office and the auditorium's just right out my door. And the whole building rattles because they're trying to do something for a big youth event. We got a hip hop artist coming in. And then I get a text from one of our counselors. She's like, hey, can I use your office? I'm right next to the auditorium and it's rattling and I have a 4:30 appointment. And I said, well, I'm right next to the auditorium too, and my office is rattling. So we met out in the lobby and we're like, where can we find something, And so we have a mother's room for crying babies, where moms can come there and watch. And I said, what about this room? And she goes, this is great, but we need to remove all the pictures off the wall, remove the baby changing station, because one of my clients is going through a pretty traumatic situation that this room could. And my point is we moved the baby changing station. We tried to make it look like not like a mother's room. And, I don't know who the client was. I don't know anything of that, but okay, clearly people have gone through trauma. We kind of knew all that and moved it all out. And she did 2 counseling sessions in the mother's room. And I just think at the end of the day, our staff knows, our team knows, like if we don't get people whole, we're not fulfilling the Great Commission. I mean, obviously the gospel, the good news, but he didn't just die for our sins. He bore our shame, which is part of the mental health conversation, and all. So yeah, to Julie's point, you have to allocate resources and you have to be intentional about it.
Yep.
And if I can ride the back of that, I would say you cannot do this half-heartedly. I think there's two major approaches, maybe two lanes you have to run. Number one, the pastor and his wife have to do the hard work of dealing with their stuff. And I think I'm a better pastor today because I've dealt with some stuff. Julie's dealt with some stuff that you go, oh, that's not a big deal. But then you get into it, you're like, it's affecting every relationship in your life. It's affecting how you lead your team. It's affecting how you preach. It's affecting how the emails hit you when they come in and they're negative. And so doing that hard work, because if you don't do it, why should anybody else do it? Also, if you don't do it, how do you even know how to lead people to do it? And in that, I'm a firm believer. I still, I think there's different tiers of how counselors, pastors, psychologists would feel in this. I'm a firm believer. There's a lot of counseling centers out there. They'll keep you string along for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And I'm like, no, we want you whole and living. Now you can have checkpoints, but we want everything working. And so we've kind of talked to our counselors and said, hey, when you kind of diagnose someone, this is probably a 3 to 6 month, a 6 to 9 month, a 9 month to a year. This might be a 2-year process, but let's try to set some goals to help people
Yeah.
heal and be whole, not be dependent, because we have codependency. If you're not careful, you'd be codependent on your counselor. And so that's been a huge win for us as people finding wholeness. And so there are so many little steps that I think we don't copy and paste much here. We really try to dig in and say, why are we doing what we're doing and how does that come out? And so when our Good Life launched, it is teaching, it is small groups, it's devotionals every day, and it all kind of ties in and leads people toward ultimately forgiveness, right? That's the last week where you understand God's grace and forgiveness for you. And so now you forgive others in spite of what you've gone through. But then on top of that, okay, now we got to walk that journey with them. And so it's a comprehensive approach to that. And I would just caution anybody to just flippantly go into it. I've got friends of mine, probably a half a dozen churches, who say the Good Life's the best discipleship thing they've ever seen. They'll take it and preach it and use it. And I'm like, please do not go past, week 4, because if you do, you're going to have more issues in your church. And so I'll leave you with this. About 2 weeks ago, there was a lady in our church. She started years ago. And man, she was all about stomping the stigma, and she was all about all the phrases. And like, she would push back on me when I would say things about mental health. And I'm like, no, there's wholeness for you. Sweet lady. But man, she's been through a lot. And I don't even know all her story. Julie's been in some of the sessions that she's gone through. But I say all that to say, finally, after she had gotten to where she was cooped up at home, she dealt with some trauma and various things. We knew her story, and she finally started a 2-year journey with Rachel. And it's been 2 years, and she wouldn't come out of her house. She's now sitting on the front row in church, thousands of people. And she sent me a picture the other day, and it was her folder. And it just said, I've just all my tribes. 2 years.
Trauma
I get
folder.
emotional thinking about it. I get emotional, and I think I get emotional thinking about it because Rachel has told me this lady could work in our counseling center now. Now, not as a counselor, but as a receptionist, as somebody that does, because she's done the hard work. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Praise God. That's wonderful. And I absolutely agree with you. That's why the one thing I really like about the trauma model that we have is there's a beginning and there's an end. And while the healing continues and the God is continuously transforming us until we're in heaven, right? That final transformation. Counseling doesn't have to last forever.
Yeah.
And there can be a good end where you have wholeness and true restoration, not just, prettying up, but true inner healing and restoration. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for sharing your story, for all the wonderful things that you've shared today. And I know y'all are in Locust Grove, Georgia. If somebody wants to come and visit your church, it's the Good Life. That's where you are. Relevant Church in Locust Grove, Georgia. And thank you so much. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Denise.